Welcome to the Be Empowered podcast with your host, Graham Hopkins. My goal is to help you regain your power by bridging the gap between who you think you are right now and who you really are. In simple language, that is like making your childhood dreams come true. This is for those who want to make an impact in their lives but don't know how to get there. Be ensured, when you know and feel connected to your spiritual mind, you master your world. Welcome everybody to this session of the Be Empowered Show. I'm your host, Graham Hopkins. The Be Empowered Show is really a conversation about what it's like to feel empowered, to feel connected to your own truth, as opposed to feeling disconnected from. Today I have a really exciting person to interview and to have a conversation with. Her name is Regina Dawn Akers. So Regina, I'd like to welcome you on board the Be Empowered Show.
Thank you. Thank you. I'm very happy to be here.
So Regina, you have a fascinating story, and it started probably in your childhood, and you had times where you started connecting with this course called A Course of Miracles. And over a period of time, things started to happen that really took you on a really marvelous journey of exploration and feeling connected with the divine. I was wondering if you can just briefly give us your story as to how all these events fit together.
Yeah, well, the shortest version of the story is that it's grace or a miracle or whatever you want to call it. I can't really say how everything came to be, but what I can tell you was that I did come across A Course in Miracles, and I did at one point in my life feel it was time to start studying it. And there was something in me that was very dedicated. I don't know why, but I started studying the workbook, and I started reading the text, and I did it every day, just as you're supposed to. The workbook gives you very specific instructions, and I followed those instructions. The discipline surprised me, actually. But what started happening about 2 months into it is I started having visions, which also surprised me because I'm from a very conservative background, and I never anticipated such a thing. And then after about 4 months, and the visions, by the way, they were coming to teach me. They weren't just wild, visions. They were coming to teach me what I was contemplating on in A Course in Miracles. And after about 4 months or 5 months of having these visions, I had an experience where I was in a dark cavern, and I couldn't see anything. It was too dark, but I knew intuitively that there were a lot of people down there with me. I also knew intuitively there were about 8 different ways to leave the cavern, but nobody could find them because it was so dark. And I had an armful of lit candles, and people would come up to me, and I would hand them a candle, and they would use that candle to find their own doorway out and to leave the cavern. And I felt intuitively again that that was a calling, but I had no idea what it meant. So I asked, and I received a message, an inner message that asked me to write for what we call the Holy Spirit. It didn't identify itself as the Holy Spirit, but to write for the Holy Spirit and then teach what I write. After that, the visions started to go away, and every day when I would contemplate the Course, I would hear this inner voice, and I would write what it said. And again, it was still teaching me at that point, teaching me the meaning of the Course in Miracles. 3 days after I finished A Course in Miracles, meaning I had read the text twice, the manual for teachers twice, and I'd gone through the workbook once. 3 days after I finished that, I received inner guidance to read the New Testament. and to allow it to be interpreted through me. I was also guided to leave my job and to move. I did all of that. And once I moved, that's when I started reading the Bible, starting at Matthew, going all the way to Revelation. And every day I would read, and as I read, this inner voice that now I had grown accustomed to listen to, I kind of become practiced at it as I was studying the course. It would start interpreting for me, and I would just write it down. It was just the same as listening to an inner dictation. There was no thinking at all on my part, just the process of listening. And that went on for 13 and a half months, and it interpreted everything from Matthew all the way through Revelation.
Can I ask you, I often talk about being in a state of disconnect versus a state of connection. In other words, when you are in a state of connection, I say that your heart is connected to your spirit. And my question to you is, how do you know that it's the Holy Spirit that's talking to you and you're not coming from a position of disconnect?
Yeah, that's a really good question. In fact, in the beginning, I had a lot of fear about that. And I asked that question myself. I said, how will I know that it's you and not my ego? And the answer I got is, you will know me by my consistency. And you can go back and you can look at everything that I've ever written with the Holy Spirit, and there's an absolute consistency that is there. And so that statement proved to be true. In fact, what I've learned over time is not only is the Holy Spirit consistent, but actually the ego is consistent too. Even if the ego is using spiritual words, it can't get away from its judgment and its divisive way of speaking and thinking. So once you get to know both that inner guidance that we call the Holy Spirit, and you get to know that voice of separation that we call the ego, it actually becomes very easy to tell the difference between the two. And I think that period of time that I spent with A Course in Miracles was actually a training period for me. So that by the time I was writing the interpretation of the New Testament, I was really clear. But I did experience fear some days when writing. And there were days when I would cross out what I wrote. And so once the entire NTI was done, I had to go back over and uncover some of the things I had crossed out, because they were actually okay. There was nothing wrong with them. It was my own personal ego resistance that couldn't take that level of truth yet. But actually,
okay. Can you just explain what NTI is for the viewers?
Oh, sure. Here, I have, let me see if we can see this. This is NTI. Can you see that?
Yep. Mm-hmm.
It's the Holy Spirit's interpretation of the New Testament. And NTI is a nickname, and and it just means New Testament interpretation. But that's what was written through me when I was reading the New Testament and allowing this inner voice to interpret it, and it ended up being published.
Can we just explain that Regina didn't really have, let's say, you weren't conditioned.
No, I didn't know anything.
In any
fact,
way before you started writing this book.
Yeah.
Is that right?
Yeah, there are very, very common words that people use, like the word manifest. I had never even heard that word. I was completely unconditioned, a completely blank slate. I had studied A Course in Miracles, gone through it in that year, which actually for me was 13 and a half months, but that was the extent. And really what that did, what A Course in Miracles did, is it got me in touch with that inner voice, and it got me trained at listening to that inner voice. But I feel that everything that I know came from the inner voice. Sometimes people make a comment, and of course I know nothing about the truth of Jesus's life. There's lots of different stories, and who knows. But one of the stories is that he actually went to India and was taught in India. And sometimes I'll hear people say, well, he had to learn it somewhere. And I say, well, why couldn't he have just learned it from within himself? Why did he have to go anywhere? Because that's how I learned. So most people think you have to learn from someone outside of you, but I don't see why Jesus ever had to have left Nazareth. He could have, he could have received all of that information from within. I know that for a fact.
I agree with you totally, and I think it's an amazing story that you have. It's a great witness to the power that we have within each of us.
Yes.
So how did you empty yourself of all the distractions, of the chatter that goes inside your head all the time? How did you empty yourself of that in order to pen or scribe these words?
Yeah, when it first started, I was asked to read the New Testament and to realize I didn't understand it. And if I'd realized I didn't understand it, then the interpretation would be given. So I'm a fairly intelligent woman, so when I read words, I do think I understand them. So the first thing I had to do after reading is I had to let go of what I thought it meant. And I started in a very an exaggerated way because I was learning to let go. And what I would do is I would write in my mind on a blackboard what I thought this meant that I had just read, and then I would erase it. And after I did that mentally and I was completely empty, and then I wanted to hear only what the inner voice would say, then it would start to come. So in the beginning it was, you could call it a lot of work to be empty. But then just like with any other skill, it got easy. I would get to where I read it, I thought I understood it, and I'd forget it just like that. So you can get good at anything with practice, and that's basically what happened.
Can you explain to me what you mean when you say that the New Testament is a symbol?
Sure. Well, actually, there's perfect evidence that it's a symbol because there are so many interpretations of it. If you sit down with a Baptist in America, you'll get one interpretation. If you sit down with one of Jehovah's Witnesses, you'll get another interpretation. If you sit down with a Pentecostal, you'll get another interpretation. So obviously it's a symbol, and it can be interpreted a number of ways. So that's really what that means. And then the interpretation that was given to me is an interpretation that points toward awakening. And in fact, the teachings that are in NTI are very similar to the teachings that you might find from like Sri Nisargadatta Maharaj or Ramana Maharshi or some masters in Buddhism or Lao Tzu. It turns out to be a very, very universal type of teaching. Sometimes the example that I use is that when masters reach a certain way of seeing, when they're really fully connected or fully merged with God, it's like they're at the top of a mountain. And it doesn't matter what culture they came from. It doesn't matter what religious background they came from. It doesn't even matter what words they use. They all see the same way. But there's a lot of different hiking trails that go up this mountain. And if I'm hiking up one trail and you're hiking up another, the journey may seem very, very different at first. But then as we get closer and closer to the top, it starts becoming more and more similar. And when we get to the very top, we see exactly in the same way. And so NTI is just one of these hiking trails. And it's the one that was given to me because for me it was most helpful. But it seems to be helpful to a lot of other people too.
I just want to read a couple of sentences here from your website, Regina, because I think it's a very important point. It says, the New Testament is a symbol, just as you are a symbol, and the words I share through you are a symbol. What they point to is truth. In order to understand the symbol, one must understand the love of Christ. One prepares himself to accept that love by recognizing he does not understand the symbol, and he asks for understanding. By opening up to receive understanding without judgment,
yes,
he opens up to accept the love of Christ, which we all know is unconditional love. Do you want to kind of just add to that a little bit?
Well, one thing that I've learned is that judgment has a broader meaning than I originally thought. Used to, I thought the word judgment meant good or bad. So to judge would be like if I was judging the Bible, it would mean I would read it and say I like what I just read or I don't like what I just read. But I came to learn that judgment really means making any decision about it at all. any decision at all. So it's really asking us to be completely empty. In fact, in NTI First Corinthians is teaching us to become what it calls the empty shell. That's learning to let go of all of our beliefs, all of our opinions, all of our concepts, all of our ideas, and be completely empty. And when we learn to be completely empty, then we're filled again instantly by a source that is not what we originally called ourself, our own mind, our own thinking. And what happens is even though you may be speaking the words that are coming from that source, or you're writing the words that come from that source, or your body is acting in a way that comes from that source, what you feel like is that you're the witness of it, which is pretty amazing. You don't feel like you're the doer of it. And that's really how you can tell the difference.
Hmm. So once you got into writing this book, tell us a little bit about the process, like every day. How would you go through it?
Well, I would just get my daughter off to school first. I had a daughter that was going to school then, so I would get her off to school first. And then once the house was quiet, I would sit down and I would say a prayer, just to get centered. And then I would read the New Testament until I felt an intuitive prompt to stop. I was always told when to stop. I might be reading a sentence, a paragraph, a story, it varied, but I always knew when to stop. And then again, if I thought I understood what I read, I had to let go of everything I thought. And then once I became empty, this voice just started coming, just started streaming, and it spoke at a speed that I could write. So I just wrote, and that's all there was to it. And then after that, I would spend the rest of the day contemplating what came. So I perceived myself as the student of what I was receiving. And every day what I received, I felt was my lesson for the day. Just like A Course in Miracles workbook has 365 lessons. You spend the whole day with a lesson. I just kind of continued that practice with what was coming through me. And so what happened as a result of that willingness I was give to spend time with it when it came, it's like I began to awaken with the material as it came. And I began to see differently. And so as I began to awaken with the material was able to deepen. And so if you read NTI, if you start at the beginning, it sort of starts in one place. And we could call that place my state of mind after I finished A Course in Miracles. But then it ends in a completely different place because I awoke along with the material, and it could carry me further and further.
I've started a something on the Be Empowered Facebook page called Ponder on This, which is basically the same as what you're suggesting with the contemplation. And I listened to one of your videos today, and it was talking about contemplation and how people need to go back and not only think about it, but to contemplate and get a vision of what they're contemplating about during the day. Can you enlighten us a bit more on that process?
Well, contemplation really has a long Christian tradition, which I really wasn't aware of when I started doing it. It's a little different than meditation in that contemplation involves usually reading something and becoming inspired by what you read, maybe even receiving your own understanding that's perfect for you that day. But then you have to stay with that, because during the morning time, at least that's when I contemplate, during the morning time when you set down into your contemplation period, you can reach a very, very deep state of clarity that you might not have later when you're at work or you're doing household chores or whatever you do. And so what can happen later in the day when you're not in that deep state of clarity anymore is you can forget completely what came when you were in that deep state of clarity. So I recommend that people record it in some way, either write down what they're realizing, even if they have to put it into their own words. Not everybody hears an inner dictation. In fact, I don't anymore. but I can put the clarity into my own words. Or some people prefer to like record it in their voice, say it, but then review it over and over and over throughout the day. And that way it becomes deeper, it becomes more conscious, it becomes clear. If it's a practice, you want to make sure that you're practicing it, you want to live it, you want to be that clarity. And if you do this on a daily basis, it reminds me of Jesus praying in the Lord's Prayer for our daily bread. Your morning contemplation really does become your daily bread, and you want to dine on it literally all day long. And in that way, every day you awaken a little more than the day before, and it becomes a very wonderful experience. But to me, it doesn't do much good to spend the morning time in a meditation or a contemplation, and then to get up and walk away from it and revert to your old habits and never think about it again. I don't think you would progress near as quickly in that way. So finding a way to stay with it throughout the day, that's the way to really get somewhere.
I often say that instead of reading, hundreds of books, you're better off taking one book and put it into action. And that's what's always worked for me. And I think you're saying a similar thing with
yes. In fact, as I got better and better at contemplation, again, just like with any skill, if you do it a lot, you improve. I got to where I could sit down in the morning and maybe only read one sentence. And from one sentence, I would go into a deep clarity of receiving my daily bread, get what I need, and then get up and walk away with that. And I didn't need to read books. I needed to read a little. The reading is actually the catalyst for a contemplator. It's the catalyst that throws us into our own inner self, our own clarity. But the clarity that we carry with us through the day is the clarity that rose up within us in response to that catalyst.
So did I read somewhere where you have a daily contemplation that you send out to folks?
Well, I've done that at different times. I was studying the 7 Steps to Awakening, and I hope to return to that. That was a daily contemplation, but what I've been doing for the last year and a half is I have been writing a minister training program. I'm the founder of a church called Awakening Together, and I'm writing a minister training program, and that is actually my contemplation. So right now it's not getting sent out every day because it's being gathered in a curriculum, but that's how I start my day. So I'm still starting my day with contemplation, just the product is a little different. And then when that's done, I might go back to the 7 steps because I hadn't finished it, and I would love to go back. I got through step 3, so there's still 4 more steps to go in that book.
So can you tell us a little bit more about that?
The 7 Steps to Awakening?
Yeah.
The 7 Steps to Awakening is a book that was put together by a man named Michael Langford, only he didn't really write it in the way that people write books. He collected over 1,500 quotes from masters, and then he organized those quotes into what he calls 7 steps. For example, the first step to awakening is realizing you're not going to get there through your intellect. And I won't share what the other steps are. I think it's better for people to realize, but it's a step-by-step process. And there are quotes by people like Sri Sankara, Sri Nisargadatta Maharaj, Sri Ramana Maharshi, Sri Annamalai Swami, mostly from the Hindu tradition. And they're all very, very clear quotes. And basically the process is you read a quote, and in fact Michael says read every quote at least 3 times. You read a quote, you sit with it, you contemplate it until your own clarity begins to come. And then, of course, you capture in some way. I write my own clarity, but then what Michael also really, really insists upon is practicing then what came through you. And I took a year of silence in 2012 where I wasn't completely silent. When my daughter would come home from school in the evening, I would talk with her and cook dinner and that kind of thing. But I have always had a very busy life. Now I'm back to being very busy. For a year, I stopped all tasks, and while my daughter was at school, I spent all day, every day in contemplation of the 7 steps. And in that year, I got through almost the first 3 steps, which is probably around 750 quotes. So that was spending all day, every day with it. So it's not a book that's meant to be rushed through. It's a book that's meant to be gone through very slowly. A lot of people chose to do the 7 steps because I was doing it. And everyone received their own clarity with each quote, and it was really very helpful, because there's nothing like being led by your own inner self. If there are 6.5 billion people on the earth, there are actually 6.5 billion paths to awakening. There are a lot of similarities across the different paths, but no 2 individual paths are exactly alike. And this is why we can't really copy someone else. We can hear things from someone else that may really resonate, and if so, then we want to take that. But we can also hear things from other people that does not resonate, and we don't want to feel guilty and think, oh, I should be doing that, or I'm bad because I'm not doing that, because that may not be your path. We each have to let this inner guide right here guide us, on our own way from this sense of separation back to the realization of wholeness. And contemplation is a great way to do that, because when you sit down and contemplate, it's just you and what you're contemplating, and you'll get the clarity that you need. And it doesn't matter what anybody else gets on that same quote. It's all about you and your awakening.
So that leads me into my next question, which is, if somebody hasn't done, say, the Course in Miracles, but they want to start connecting with their inner guide, they want to start feeling more connected, how do they do it?
I would begin with prayer. I would begin with asking and assuming I don't know, which is a great place to start, and then seeing what shows up for you. Different things will show up for different people, but a really heartfelt prayer does amazing things. A really heartfelt prayer does amazing things. In fact, the very first heartfelt prayer that I prayed that started this whole thing for me, for some reason, and again, I don't know why, I wanted to know what truth was. And at that time, I thought that it would be a Christian religion, just because of where I came from. There's so many Christian religions, and I wanted to know which Christian religion had the truth. And so I said this prayer, and the prayer was very heartfelt. And also, what I realize now, I didn't then, but what I said in the prayer was very, very important too, because I said, please let me know the truth. I don't care what it is. And that was very important, because I didn't put any restrictions on what the truth had to look like. Even though I thought it was going to be a Christian religion, I didn't say it had to be. And then I set out on this huge research project where I studied all of the Christian religions in depth, and I just kept finding that wasn't it, that wasn't it, that wasn't it. And in the end, I sat there thinking my prayer hadn't been answered because I didn't find the right church. But what had actually happened was I had emptied out an idea I need to empty out, that it was going to be a church, a Christian church. And then shortly after that, I saw Marianne Williamson on A Course in Miracles, on Oprah Winfrey, speaking about A Course in Miracles. And so, the beginning of my path was first emptying out the ideas it was going to be a Christian church, and then seeing a lady on the Oprah show. And that's how it began for me. And then that led me to buying Marianne's book. I read it twice. That led me to the Course, right, which led me to find my inner guide. So that's what got me started. That heartfelt prayer was the first step. And there are all kinds of ways to find one's inner guide. So I also wouldn't limit to what it needs to look like.
So why is it important that people come to the point where they don't know? They come to that point where they say, God, I don't know, can you help me? Well,
because again, back to what you read on my website a little bit ago, if there's anything we think we do know, that's going to block what the Spirit wants to teach us or what the Spirit wants to guide us to. I used to be a corporate trainer, and even as a corporate trainer teaching like a management course, the people that you could not teach were the people who already thought they knew how to manage. But the people who knew they didn't know anything, you could teach them so well, and by far they would end up being the better managers. So you can't fill a cup that's already full, I think is a saying. So if we want to be filled by the knowledge that the Spirit would give, then we have to empty out the knowledge that we have, no matter how right we think we are. We have to be humble. We have to be absolutely humble, be completely empty, and just want to realize what's given.
But this is a very big ask, because we live in an age where the old knowledge is heightened. We think we know.
Yeah, we think we know. Yeah, and that's the obstacle, actually. That's the obstacle to God. Every single thing we think we know is like another brick in the wall that blocks out God or blocks out love. Every time we let go of something we think we know, that takes a brick out of the wall, and then a little more God, a little more true realization can flow through.
Cool. Can you tell us a little bit more about this up and coming project where you're starting a church?
Oh, sure. That came after the silence. At the very end of the year of silence, I was guided to begin a church, which is kind of funny, actually. I just got the joke because I was originally looking for a church, remember? In fact, I was originally looking for a church that had the right interpretation of the Bible, and yeah, well, anyway. So you always get what you want in your own way, but trust me, that none of that had anything to do with me. But I was guided to start a church, and I was given a purpose and 5 core values. And basically the main idea behind Awakening Together is that we're all equal. We all have the same inner guidance. No one is a spiritual authority over another person. And yet at the same time, we can all assist and help one another. And also, again, you'll remember in that initial vision that I had, there were like 8 different ways out of the dark cavern. Well, Awakening Together uses all spiritual paths that point to the same truth. You know, some people, it may be the Bhagavad Gita that speaks to them. Some people, it may be the New Testament. Some people, it may be A Course in Miracles. You know, we don't want to have a judgment against any path that's going to help any person. So Awakening Together embraces all paths that points to truth, and we welcome everyone following their own inner guidance on their path in their way. And we also welcome clarity no matter who it comes from. It could be an ancient master, or we have one 18-year-old kid who often speaks great clarity that nobody's ever heard of from Ardmore, Oklahoma. And we see the clarity when it comes through him and the clarity when it comes through an ancient master like Lao Tzu or Buddha or Jesus to be the exact same clarity. We think that all clarity comes from one source, and we really value clarity no matter what source it's coming from.
What do you see the significance of 8? What does that mean to you?
Right now I don't know yet, so maybe someday I'll figure that out. I don't know the answer.
Okay, one final question. What's your definition of truth?
That's a very good question. Truth is absolutely changeless, and we could say eternal. Eternal, of course, supposes time, but we'll say eternal. It's absolutely changeless, and it's eternal. So that means that anything that changes or anything that is not eternal is not truth. So, for example, this body is not truth. This personality of Regina, you know, is not truth. But there's an awareness here that's been the same ever since this body and this personality was born. But, you know, in my earliest memory, ever since I was around 5, although my personality has changed a lot, my body has changed a lot, my way of thinking has changed a lot, this awareness has always been the same. So when you get to something that is changeless and eternal and absolutely unaffected by everything, my happiest days, my saddest days, my healthiest days, my sickest days, the awareness has always been the same, then you're getting to truth, something that is changeless, non-affected, and does not end.
Excellent. Well, Regina, I've really enjoyed this conversation with you, but there's a lot more. Can I invite you back for another session so we can chat some more?
Perfect.
So I'd like to thank everybody for joining the Be Empowered show. It's been a privilege to talk to Regina, and if you have anything that you would like to discuss with Regina or myself, you can always contact Regina on her website. Which is the best website to contact you on, Regina?
Well, I have 3 or 4 websites, but probably the one that is more focused personally on my teaching is reginadonakers.com. And then
Cool.
if anybody is interested in the church, because it is an online universal church, that's awakening-together.org.
Excellent. Or you can go to Amazon and download my book, which is the Manifesto of Your Inspirational Mind, or at www.beempoweredgroup.com. There's a free download called Know Your True Value and Worth. So until next time, we look forward to catching up with Regina again, and we wish you every blessing. Thank you so much.
Hey, thanks so much for listening to the Be Empowered podcast. For more on regaining your power by bridging that gap between who you think you are right now and who you really are, go to www.beempoweredgroup.com and enter your name and email address to receive a free ebook and get notified of any upcoming podcasts. Remember, when you know and feel connected to your spiritual mind, you master your world. Changing your energy transforms your life.